Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about Google's efforts to help publishers generate bigger audiences and profits. Google has long had a complicated relationship with news publishers. On the one hand, it sends billions of visitors to their websites every year through its main search engine, Google News, and other products. On the other hand, some publishers believe that the Mountain View company has siphoned away ad revenue on the back of their content. Amy Adams Harding, Google's Director of Analytics and Revenue Optimization for News and Publishing, believes the search giant has the potential to provide a net benefit to publishers. Over the past several years, her team has developed a suite of tools aimed at helping media outlets to optimize their content so it reaches a bigger audience and drives more revenue. In our interview, Amy walked me through these tools and explained how they work. She also talked about why publishers need to adopt many of the strategies that e-commerce platforms developed over a decade ago. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about my newsletter. This week I published a 2,500-word deep dive into popular information, a Substack newsletter that has over 150,000 signups and 7,000 paying subscribers. Its founder, Judd Legume, walked me through how he developed his journalism beat and his number one way to convert free signups into paid subscribers. To receive case studies like this, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, on to my interview with Amy. Hey, Amy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
So you currently work on the Google News Initiative, but you have a long history at working at Google and one of its companies that it acquired on the advertising side. How did you first get your start at the company?
Well, you're right. I actually came to Google through the DoubleClick acquisition way back in 2008. And I was working primarily on the media sales side of things, launching the AdX product. So about a year after the acquisition, I was recruited to make the jump and work on the Google side of things as the head of industry for retail. And I worked primarily with eBay and our global relationships there. But after a few years of that, I found out about a startup within the company, within Google, for a brand new product in the market research space. So I became the business lead for a tool called Google Consumer Surveys. And that's actually where the data conversation with publishers started and led to what I do today with my team.
And so you were at DoubleClick all the way back since 1998 when it was first founded, right?
That's true. I was there in the beginning when we went public. It was a super fun and interesting ride. And I was at DoubleClick through actually right after 9/11. I was laid off. I was running travel advertising there and was laid off 3 weeks after 9/11. So I went and worked at a couple startups in the interim, but then was recruited to come back to the company in 2006 to start up the AdX business.
And you said that you eventually started working on kind of the e-commerce working with e-commerce websites and stuff like that. And I think this will come into later in our conversation when you talk about how news organizations should start thinking like e-commerce organizations.
Right.
What does it mean to be in terms of what you were helping them do? What are some of the super sophisticated stuff that e-commerce businesses kind of learned a long time ago that and this will kind of lead into the Google News side, but what are some of the things that there's light years ahead of, news publishers on?
It's a lot of it's blocking and tackling, to tell you the truth, Simon. It's things like, making sure that you have search icons in your mobile experience that allow a user to get to your shopping interface. It's simple things like the color of your buttons, the buy now button, right? It's shape and color. It's site design. It's simplifying the funnel. So we work with a lot of our partners now in the news space about how to simplify their registration or their subscription funnel, because oftentimes they ask for 15 fields of information when really you don't need that. You want to eliminate any barriers to purchase. So it's some of these basic e-commerce tactics that, of course, the Amazons of the world learned many, many years ago, decades at this point, that we are now trying to bring into the consciousness and into the forefront of the way our news partners run their subscription funnel.
And so, like an e-commerce business, they know like every aspect of the user journey, whereas like the typical news publisher who doesn't employ like a data scientist or something, like they might know unique visitors, page views, top referrals, and which are their most popular articles, but they're not, for the most part, they don't know how to track that user journey. So it's like you said, like where they're testing out different icons and buttons and stuff like that, right?
That's right. Google Analytics is a super powerful tool. It wasn't built for news publishers. So much of what my team does is help re-visualize Google Analytics data through the lens of a news publisher, helping them understand what metrics really matter to their business and how to turn what we call this data puke from Google Analytics, this tsunami of numbers into actionable insights and recommendations for their business.
And so you moved then from e-commerce over to Google Consumer Surveys, which I think is like a competitor to like SurveyMonkey and stuff like that, right? It's a way to pull and either your own internal user base or some kind of like panel of users that Google is finding, right?
That's right.
Uh-huh. And how did you move from that to working on the Google News Initiative?
Well, it's an interesting story. I'll try and make it quick, but we were talking to publishers about data. As you mentioned, we offer a part of the Google Surveys tool, which we call selfies lovingly. It's basically a house survey. So a publisher can ask their own users their own questions on their own site. And it's a very, very powerful form of subjective feedback. It's a great way to hear from your readers and the consumers of your content. And so as we were having these conversations about surveys and research for these news websites, we were hearing more and more that these publishers they were just overwhelmed by the amount of data coming from their Google Analytics. So that would be the objective, passively collected data on the website. So just as you mentioned, page views, time on site, things like that. They just didn't know what to do with that tsunami of data. So we realized that there was an opportunity to both help them parse through the data and really focus on the metrics that matter to their business, but also combine that passively collected objective information with the actively collected subjective research from house surveys. And that's what built our practice around consulting with our news publishers about driving their business.
And so you built an actual tool. What's the name of that tool?
We did. Well, now we've built 3, but in the beginning, we built our first tool called News Consumer Insights. And that was just what we were talking about, that revisualization of the Google Analytics data through a user engagement lens. And 3 or 4 years ago when we built this, in many ways, it was revolutionary to the news partners that we talked to. They were not used to thinking about the funnel. Most of them had never worked at an e-commerce company or thought about, funnels in the way that, of course, e-commerce players had been doing for a long time. And one of our mantras was, you are in the e-commerce business. You are selling your content. Even if you're not asking for subscription dollars or contributions, you are still trying to get your content in front of readers' eyeballs, and you need to start acting like an e-commerce player. And that was a sort of the genesis of us understanding that we needed to help them understand which metrics matter. So defining and measuring the metrics that matter. So in essence, really filtering and culling the data down to the metrics that'll have impact on their business and eliminating the noise and distraction from the data that might look or seem important. And on my team, we have this rule that if you can't answer so what to a metric, it doesn't make the cut. So with that idea, we went and started to look through Google Analytics data with a bunch of our news partners. So it's worth saying that news organizations are a critical part of our product development process. So we met with them to gather feedback on what we were thinking about in building our first generation of what was really a dashboard. And it informed how we organized the data and how we delivered it to them. Because one of the important things that we can offer as a team is giving our publishers time back. So if they can spend less time analyzing and more time acting on these business recommendations, they'll be better off. Because especially in the local news space, publishers are not, replete with resources. As you mentioned, most of them do not have data scientists on staff. So when we can step in and help them understand what to analyze and give them some actionable recommendations, it's been met with much appreciation from the partners that we've worked with.
So let's describe it for my listeners. Obviously, this is a podcast. It would be great if we could show them
right.
the dashboard, but we're going to describe it the best we can. So I tried this out. This is a tool that it's a separate tool, but it integrates with Google Analytics. So you go to the tool, and then the first thing it asks you to do is, can we access your Google Analytics? And you have to give it permission. That's right. And once it does, it just pulls in all your Google Analytics into this dashboard. But this dashboard, whereas Google Analytics, like, it's kind of overwhelming when you get into it because there's so many fields and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. This dashboard is super simple. It divides your readership into 3 buckets. What are the 3 buckets?
So we start with your casual readers. And this, as you might imagine, is the vast majority of most publishers' readers or visitors. The Pareto law, the 80-20 law, oftentimes applies here. So that would be the top of your funnel, your casual readers.
And those are readers who've only visited once in the last 30 days or whatever the time period is.
That's correct. So you might call those your one and done. Maybe they saw an article through search or through social and they came to visit, but these are not habitual readers. The next bucket down in the middle is what we call our loyal readers. So they're visiting, between maybe 2 and 15 times a month. So these are people that are starting to grow an emotional bond or starting to utilize or habitualize to your content a little bit. So we put them in the middle, and then the bottom of the funnel we call brand lovers. These are people who are going to bat for you. They are coming to your site more than 15 times a month, so at least every other day. This is usually a very small slice of your readers. However, it's the most important because what we found is the brand lover category has the highest propensity to participate in supporting your site in a reader direct manner. And that may be a subscription if you offer that, contribution, membership, some way. These are people that find your content very valuable. They keep coming back. And that's what we help point our partners to, driving casual readers down the funnel to become loyal and loyal readers to become brand lovers.
Yeah, so the whole point of this tool is to make it simpler for publishers to first get a snapshot of their audience of like how much is coming in. It'll tell you what percentage of your unique visitors are either part of the casual, middle tier, or most loyal, and then what percentage of your page views. Because obviously the most loyal, there'll be a tiny percentage of unique visitors, but because they're visiting 15 times a month, they'll actually have a disproportionate portion of your total page views. And the whole point of this tool is to try to help publishers optimize to move people more quickly from bucket number 1 to buckets 2 and 3 to become more loyal, right?
That's exactly right. And when we released this tool, it was amazing to watch our partners look at those buckets and say, wait a second, we've been chasing eyeballs. We've been chasing what amounts to casual readers, which may be a high percentage of our readers, but they're a very low percentage of total page views, and importantly, a very low percentage of revenue. So they've been chasing eyeballs, not the right kind, right? So it's good to fill the top of your funnel, but you need to put energy and resource and focus behind moving those casual readers down the funnel. And there are tactics, which we talk about, of course, and give actionable recommendations on the tool, on News Consumer Insights. So that's part of that idea of helping uncover this insight. And then even more important than the insight are really the actions associated with that. So when you get to look at the funnel, when you page down on the tool, we've actually created what we call a decision engine. And once again, along the lines of helping publishers do less analyzing and more doing, we created this decision engine to surface recommendations to help our partners focus on the improvements that they need to make. So it's personalized based on your Google Analytics data. So when you log on with your website, you may see that you have 4 recommendations to help you improve reader engagement. Your friend down the street with a different news website may have 8 recommendations. So it's personalized, and it helps our partners really focus on what's going to move the needle for their sites. And we actually divvy those up between more visits, creating more visits, and then creating longer or deeper visits, because that is going to help push those users, encourage those users down the funnel from becoming casual to loyal, and all the way down to brand lovers.
And we'll talk a little bit about what those specific kinds of things are in a second. First, I want to contextualize like where this fits within Google. So I think when you first started working on this, it was before the Google News Initiative existed, right?
That's right. Yep.
So let's talk about what the Google News Initiative is. Like most people who have heard of it, they know of it because it's giving like $300 million in grants to news publishers. I think largely like local news publishers.
That's right.
What's the mission of it, and what are its various arms? Like how should we think of the Google News Initiative?
So I would say if you wanted to crystallize it, it's Google's effort to support the news ecosystem through things like programs and tools, training, and initiatives. And all of those elements are geared towards helping these publishers build essential skills and capabilities in-house to grow their businesses and their audience as they make this transition to a digital world. And as you mentioned, a central focus of the work is really with small and medium-sized publishers right now. So some examples of the programs and initiatives might be, we have innovation challenges where we have funding opportunities for publications that may have an initiative that they want to try, or a product that they want to create, but they just don't have the resources to do it. So the innovation challenge allows them to apply for a grant for funding. And we've done several rounds of those throughout the world, actually. They're launched on a regional basis, and those have been really exciting to watch. We also have a training center, which I'd love to mention because it has more than 40 lessons on Google's tools that are geared towards journalists. So not everyone realizes that we have these specific tools that are meant for the journalist community. And you can access whenever you want these 40 lessons. And just to give you an example of what one of those tools might be, we recently launched a product called Pinpoint. And it is built to help journalists explore and analyze large collections of documents. It could be PDFs, it could be handwritten notes, anything in between. And actually, we just found out a few weeks ago that it was used in a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalism piece by the Boston Globe. So that was really exciting for us to see. One of our, very nascent tools that had just been launched, already used in this kind of investigative journalism. So that would be an example.
And how does Google News Initiative relate to Google News? Like, do those two divisions interact with each other?
I mean, Google News is part and parcel of everything that we do. And of course, everyone that's working on Google News is connected to everyone working on the Google News Initiative, but it's just one of our offerings in the news space.
So how does this all tie back to Google's business? Like some people have cynically referred to the Google News Initiative as kind of like a PR campaign to win over highly influential publishers, especially since some are like, claiming that Google has hurt their businesses or something like that. What these tools that you describe are mostly free. How does this help Google's business?
Well, our CEO has been very public in how he feels it's important for our company to support the news industry. And he He has said that spreading knowledge makes life better for everyone, and it's at the heart of our mission as a company, and it's actually aligned with the mission of publishers and journalists. So in that way, our futures are tied together. So making sure that there is a robust news ecosystem around the world, not just here in the States, but globally, is important to our business, but it's also really important to functioning democracies as well.
Mm-hmm. So it's more about the mission rather than the core business.
Oh, well, don't get me wrong. I mean, having, keeping robust information available and indexable by our search engine and any other search engine out there on the market is important to our business, right? When our readers come to us or when users come to Google, they're looking for information. So having, high quality journalism available and searchable is essential to people around the world. And so people come to Google looking for the information that they can trust. So making sure that there is trustworthy journalism and information available to direct them to is core to our mission.
So let's get back into the tool itself. And I think this is a really important conversation that publishers should be thinking about is how does the tool measure the value of a visitor? What are some of the characteristics that make one visitor more valuable than the other? We've already talked about the number of visits in a month, but
Mm-hmm.
I think based on looking at it that it views, for instance, people coming from newsletters more valuable than people coming from Facebook or Google or whatever.
That's right. And that's because we can see through Google Analytics, and we help our partners see where certain types of users, where they fall into these buckets. So you mentioned newsletters. I could talk all day long about newsletters because they are one of the most important ways to engage, retain, and sell to readers. So we found time and time again that newsletter readers have the highest propensity to subscribe or contribute or participate in your site sustainability. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? A newsletter subscription is basically a $0 subscription, unless you're on Substack, and then you might be paying for that subscription. But it's almost like a gateway drug to a paid subscription or membership to a site. So you have users that have invited you into their inbox. They're inviting you to communicate and push information to them. That signals more loyalty. It signals intent and trust. So that's why we focus with our partners so intently on newsletters. And interestingly, Google actually doesn't have a newsletter product. So we talk about newsletters with our partners in general, but we really do spend a lot of time focusing on strategy for acquisition of newsletter subscribers because they tend to be really bottom of the funnel type of readers.
I was under the impression that newsletter traffic is a lot of it's dark social that comes in as direct traffic in Google Analytics. How does this tool parse that?
Yeah, we do. We have a bubble graph that shows if you dig into the tool past that first page that you're talking about, where we visualize the funnel and we get to those actionable recommendations. We show you a bubble graph that says, well, here is, on one axis, the number of users coming in from a certain kind of traffic, and on the other axis, the value of those users. Dark social is usually because sites have not done a great job tagging their Google Analytics structure, they do see a lot of users bucketed into dark social. So we have some recommendations for them to be able to better tag their site so they can strain out any of those identifiable types of traffic into the proper buckets. But there will always be some traffic that's not really parsable in this way. The good news is that the trend stays the same, no matter if they're categorized as dark traffic or dark social or they're correctly categorized as newsletters. These are the most important users on or readers on a news site in particular, and the strategy around acquisition of those types of users should be really central to the revenue strategy for these partners.
So are you talking about like it when they're linking to their site from their newsletter, just putting some kind of tag like pound newsletter in the URL so that Google Analytics can know that that's coming from a newsletter or something like that?
Yeah, it's tagging strategy in that way. And we actually, that leads me to talk about the third tool that we launched. And it was actually last summer, and it's called News Tagging Guide. And the reason we launched it is because we found that Google Analytics tagging is not for the faint of heart. I mean, it can be very resource consuming, and not everybody has the technical expertise to do it well in-house. So we designed the tool, and by the way, it's free, and it was designed to help news publishers make the most out of their Google Analytics by doing two things: really defining which engagement metrics matter for their audience and revenue growth. So that idea of identifying which metrics matter, but then also simplifying the technical implementation. So News Tagging Guide, or NTG as we call it, actually creates the code snippet for the partner to then copy and paste into their site. So it really does simplify the technical implementation to make sure that tagging is done correctly. And then also it enhances the capability of our other tools like News Consumer Insights, but by unlocking, richer data sets. So not only is the source data better because it's been tagged correctly, but it also unlocks additional audience insights from Google Analytics in our News Consumer Insights tool.
So you gave, number of visits in a month, people who come from newsletters as being more valuable. Are there any other things that it considers like to be a valuable visitor?
Sure. Actually, one thing I don't hear talked about a whole lot, especially in the local space, because it's a bit more of a technical lift to implement, but that would be web push notifications. So what we've seen over time and through talking to literally hundreds, if not thousands of websites, is that web push notifications are a similarly engaged audience to newsletter traffic, right? These are people that have said, yes, you may push information to me. I am inviting you to contact me. But it's a different audience than newsletter. So the overlap is quite small. So if resources are available and there's volition, we recommend that our partners implement web push notifications because there are third parties that can help with it. So if there are resources available, we say, maybe work with a third party because it is a bit more of a technical lift, but it unlocks this new type of audience that is a down the funnel, more loyal type of audience. So it's an important one to think about.
And that's the little Chrome pop-up that
Mhm.
says like this website wants to send you notifications a lot, and then it gives the option of allow or block.
That's right. And also oftentimes you see it on your mobile phone as well.
Huh. Well, I'll confess that I've always pushed block, so I don't even know what that looks like when they do it. So let's talk about the recommendation. So, like,
Sure.
what are examples? So it's like you said, it's automatically generated and
Mhm.
personalized. What are some examples of like it tries to give them like concrete, actionable
That's
recommendations,
right.
right? So, like, what are some examples of what this dashboard can tell them?
Right. So we already talked about newsletters, which I'll tell you 9 times out of 10 pops up as the first insight because
Hmm.
it's so important. Another one would be, and this is far less sexy, but structured data. So we take a look at, or the tool takes a look at your structured data and says, can uncover if you're missing the news article tagging, which can impact search discoverability, right? So if search engines can't see you, then they can't surface your content to a user that may be looking for it. So that's kind of a, deeper in the weeds, but very important piece of technical debt that some of these sites that haven't really been in their code for a while might be missing. So we flag that quite often if there's an issue with structured data. So
Hmm.
that would be one that might not be obvious. And then when you think about longer visits, so when we talk about driving a user from the top of the funnel down to become more loyal, the amount of utilization of your content, of consumption of your content is important. So there are a few things that you can do along those lines. So the first is, and everyone's talked about this for the past 5 years, I feel like, but page load time. If your page takes too long to load, people will bounce. They're gonna get frustrated. They're not going to consume your content. So we can flag if your page load time is high, but we can also take a look at your recirculation strategy. So how easy are you making it for your readers to uncover another interesting article or page that they should look at? So recirculation strategy is super important to this idea of deepening engagement of your readers. So that would include things like maximizing visibility, right? So making sure that your recirculation articles are easily discoverable. And that looks a little bit different on mobile than it does on desktop. So it's important to consider both experiences. Things like sticky headers, making your header sticky, and that just provides your readers more options to navigate your site. So there are recommendations for those kind of actions that are built into the decision engine. So those would be a couple of examples on the engagement side of things. But then the tool also will take a look at your reader revenue strategy and create recommendations there if a site does have a reader revenue plan.
And the reader revenue stuff, that's got to be all input so that it can measure it. I'm guessing like you need to hook it to the website in specific ways.
Yeah, so and that's part of what News Tagging Guide is really good at helping with, is that goal setting in Google Analytics. But it's not just the tagging. I mean, it can be ideas around, trying to understand what your readers are looking for so that you can message your values. And actually, that's something that that idea of expressing your company mission and values is super important. The other thing to understand is, if you're asking a reader for money, why should they pay you, right? So collecting readers' feedback around, why they might contribute or subscribe is really important. And we were talking about Google surveys before. That's a great tool to use, those house surveys, to collect this reader feedback. And I'll tell you, what's interesting is we did an engagement with BuzzFeed, because they were starting off, they were deciding, should we have a reader direct revenue request? Should we start contributions? And we worked with them on, well, let's ask your readers, do they want to contribute? How much do they think they should contribute? Why would they contribute? And what blew us all away is the number one reason why a reader would contribute is because they valued the journalism and they just wanted to support the journalism. And within a month, the average contribution was $20. So that immediately became a significant revenue line where there was none before for BuzzFeed News. So that was really exciting to see. And that was so successful that within the next 3 months, they created a plan for recurring contributions. So it kind of looks like a subscription, but they didn't want to use a paywall. So this was their way of asking for additional reader support without gating the content. And it turned out to be very successful for them.
So in terms of these recommendations, like a hypothetical use, especially for a less sophisticated publisher, like let's say it's like the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the editor looks at this dashboard, sees something like your structured data is not, up to best practices, and then that editor would then be able to ping his tech team and be like, look, this dashboard is telling me that our SEO isn't very good because of X, Y, because of this. Can you go and implement this and then hand it off to them or something like that?
It depends on the organization, but that's, that is definitely one way that the information could flow. We find that different organizations use different tools, and our tools oftentimes across the board. And what's been very gratifying to see is how organizations across the spectrum in terms of size, so it could be Richmond, it could be the New York Times, but if they can unify behind data and behind these metrics that matter, it really it really can transform the way that their different departments work together, right? So our North Star metric is audience engagement because it drives profitability across revenue streams like subscriptions, contributions, and advertising as well. And we have seen so many of our partners say, you know what, that makes sense. We're going to we're going to, create our objectives and key results for all of our departments pointing towards that North Star metric. And it really enables a better sense of shared purpose, but also when you're working towards a common goal, it's easier to work together. So that's been really exciting to see. And we've seen that with, quite a few of our partners.
And how are you onboarding and educating publishers about this tool? Like, is that your job? Like, are you having conference calls or other kinds of things like webinars and stuff like that to train them?
It happens in a bunch of different ways. So we have one-to-one engagements with some of our partners. Oftentimes we'll do an audit, we'll walk them through the tools, we'll talk to them about their strategy. We really enjoy being consultative in that way and digging into a partner's business. We also learn a lot in those engagements, and it circles back to inform our tools. So that is time very well spent for both the partner and my team. We also have a more scaled engagement, and it's called News Consumer Insights, or NCI Shift. And it's a 4-part workshop that we actually started a year ago to help reach more publishers that serve underrepresented communities, because we wanted to scale these learnings more quickly, and we wanted to scale the idea of this one-to-one audit in a way that would reach the publications that needed it the most. So we started off with Borealis Philanthropy, and they have a racial equity in journalism fund, which is incredible. It invests in news organizations led by and for people of color. And so this is a very important community of journalists and sites to support. So we created this workshop just for their fund grantees to help them accelerate their reader engagement and monetization strategies. So what we did is we performed an audit on all of their sites, and then we brought them together to work and learn from us in deep dive modules around reader engagement and reader revenue. But then importantly, after the learning module, we come back in a couple weeks and we separate them into working groups. And so they can exchange best practices. We can also offer consultative support to them to help them implement these changes. But it is so much more powerful when our partners teach each other. I mean, it's wonderful to hear Google offer an audience engagement idea, right? But it's so much more powerful when the suggestions and the proof points come from within the group. So we had another engagement like that with Greater Public, which serves nonprofit media, and it was a very engaged group. But just one example is that we were discussing push notifications like you and I just talked about, and only one of the publishers on the call had implemented push notifications successfully, but she had over 200,000 readers opted in for it. So that kind of feedback encouraged the other publishers to try it. And it also created another proof point for the recommendations that my team is providing to news publishers. So it was helpful in both ways. It was teaching that cohort the importance of web push notifications, and she gave some tips and tricks around implementation, but it also reinforced to us and gave us the learning around the importance of web notification, so we can make sure that is readily surfaced in our tools.
It sounds like there's like a lot of hands-on consulting. How big is the team that's working with publishers on your side?
Well, I like to say that we're small but mighty, Simon. We are, the sum is greater than our parts. There's about 5 of us, but that's full time. And then what we've done is we've worked with Google teams around the world to, in essence, deputize them, teach them the foundations and the framework of news consumer insights, and that they become champions for the tools, but also running these type of engagements. So they might not be reporting up through me necessarily, and my team, but they are equally as talented in making sure they're helping their publishers understand the benefits of taking this, data first mindset and this action orientation to their news partners.
You talked about BuzzFeed. What are some of the other publishers that have seen success with this tool?
So, I haven't gotten a chance to talk about our second tool called RCI. So let me give you an example that comes actually all the way from the Philippines. So you may have heard of a site called Rappler. They're one of the most read digital only news companies in the Philippines. And they were looking for ways to leverage their data in an innovative way. And so they wanted to advance reader loyalty, but also business sustainability, of course. So last year, they had a surge in readership due to two events. And first was their local elections. Local elections are, of course, a huge driver of readership for most news sites, but also the pandemic. So the pandemic created a flood of traffic to their site because people were looking for things like, where's a testing center, or, what are the coronavirus rates in my part of town? So they had an overwhelming amount of data available. So when I talk about that data tsunami, they were in the middle of the tsunami. And that's where this tool came in, real-time content insights. So it is almost an editorial version of what we bring to our partners with News Consumer Insights. It's focused on providing publishers with real-time traffic data on their site, and also taking a look at what topics are trending across the web simultaneously. So it also connects into Google Analytics, of course, but it focuses on the real-time feed from Google Analytics. And we made it engaging the same way we did with News Consumer Insights, sort of revisualizing that information to make sense to editors and journalists, to give them insights on their content performance. It's also free, so I just want to mention that. But it was really successful for Rappler. We have a newsroom view where the publisher can actually, if they have a large TV screen in their newsroom, they can see which stories are trending. And that's exciting for, it's information, but it's also exciting for the journalists to see when one of their stories breaks and it becomes one of the most popular stories. But it allows the reporters to keep pace with the reader interests and new topics as they unfold. Right. So having your finger on the pulse of what your readers want to read or what they're interested in is very important. So real-time content insights actually pulls in Google search trends on a page next to the articles that are available on your site, and you can instantly see where there's a gap in coverage. And I was talking to a journalist about this, and he said to me, "Oh, good. You realize you just freed up my summer intern from having to do this all day long, because I've got someone taking a look at search trends to help us uncover, what are readers really interested in? What are people curious about?" And that's what you find from Google Trends. So we've combined that with a snapshot of what's happening on the site, and that enables editors to make decisions. And Rappler, in using RCI and really rallying their entire newsroom around insights, they were able to increase their average monthly readers by 20%. So they really took advantage of the surge in data, and all of those top of the funnel users, they were able to push down the funnel. So they increased their average monthly readers. And with that, they had a 5% increase in ad revenue as a result of these tactics. So obviously, when you have more readers and more page views, if you do have an ad-supported model, that gives you more opportunity to create increases in ad revenue. So that was really great.
So what's like a gap it could identify that could result in kind of them redirecting? Because you said it's showing here's a surge in this type of surges, but it'll say you don't have any content underneath that rubric, right?
That's right. So you could use an example. I remember this one a few years ago. I was on a local news site in New Jersey, and it was March. So lot of Americans are interested in the NCAA tournament, as I am. I went to a big basketball school. So I was on the website and I noticed that they had 0 articles for this was a pretty large local news site in New Jersey, 0 articles about the NCAA tournament. Now, I'm pretty sure that there was some kid in that tournament who was from, somewhere in that state, or there was some story that they could try and capture readers' interest and where that, like, sort of the context of a reader's world is, but they had nothing. And I was so struck by the gap in that content that they were really missing an opportunity to connect their site with what was kind of going on in the world around them. So that would be an example.
Mm-hmm. And so any other examples you wanted to give of publishers that have used these tools?
Sure. So we've talked about Rappler, which is international. We work with a lot of new websites, but we also work with a lot of partners who are trying to make this transition from the old world to the new digital world. And almost 100 years old, Time Inc. is one of those publications. And they were looking for ways to improve their reader engagement and their subscriptions, as well as their ad performance. So we jumped into an engagement with them and started to make recommendations around this idea of engaging their readers further. So a very simple addition, they added a read next banner on mobile. I mean, this took someone 30 minutes, if even, to do. They added a read next banner on mobile and it doubled user clicks in 2 months. So that recirculation strategy allowed users to consume more content. And of course, that's good from a revenue side. And on desktop, they worked on boosting their ad viewability and their user time spent on the site by making the right rail column sticky when users scroll down. So that really improved their ad viewability. And just those few changes drove a 40% increase in user time spent on site and ad viewability. So that's really important to their business. It's important to engagement, but it's also important to revenue. So we were excited to help this really important, and it's almost a cultural institution, Time Inc. is, help them make that transition with these best practices on digital.
Yeah. And I think people don't realize when you're talking about that level of scale, changing the percentages by just a little bit on certain things can actually have huge things. Like one of the favorite examples I ever thought of was if you have 50 million uniques a month or page views a month or something like that, you could do it either. You could double it to 100 million by getting 50 million more people to visit your website, or if you could just go from only 5% of them clicking on a second page to 10% of them clicking on a second page of the users you already are getting on your site, you've doubled your page views basically. So little tweaks and just getting a user who's already there to do something extra can go a lot further than luring a whole other user to the site.
That's right. It's less resource intensive to create loyalty amongst a user that you already have. So you're absolutely right. So if you can make those readers that are already on your site, if you can turn them into loyalists, then you're increasing their contribution to your sustainability and grooming them potentially to become paid subscribers if that's something you offer, or contributors or members, or even taking part in any affiliate or commerce revenue opportunities that you might have.
Yeah, I remember I worked at US News and World Report in 2012, and they had no recommendation widgets, and I just kept on trying to get them to do it, and then they finally got around to doing it 6 months later, and it was an automatic 3 million extra page views a month just from putting in that one tool. So just to give you a sense of the scale that's possible with these little tiny tweaks.
It's amazing, and especially when you have scale like that, right? So oftentimes, those tweaks with the more established sites that have been around, can instantaneously lift their results. But there are other partners where we have to, work with them as they're starting up. So they have the advantage of not having all of these legacy issues, right? So if you're a new news provider or new content creator that started in this digital world, you have many advantages of entering into the market at this point. However, you have to spend your resources building an audience and building a brand and then retaining that audience. So there's different, we need to meet and offer tools and products and consulting that meet our partners where they are. And no two partners have the exact same needs, although we do see a lot of common themes, and that's where our tools are really focused. Like, what are these common themes? How can we, once again, help strain out all of the noise in the numbers and really focus our partners on the metrics and actions that are going to ameliorate their businesses?
Okay, Amy, well, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, although I'm not super active at Adams Harding, but please do visit us on at News Consumer Insights. You can find that on our GNI Data Tools page, or just Google News Consumer Insights and you'll be directed right there.
Okay, well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Simon.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast, so if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.